Hi, everybody. My name is Rebecca Schofield. I'm a co-chair of A Better Cambridge. Alan Sadoun, the other chair, joining today. And in this first session, we'll have Councillor McGovern and Mayor Siddiqui. Councillor Simmons can't join us tonight, but this session one, we're, gonna hear from the councillors. We got a bunch of questions, and I just wanted to kind of kick this off to get everyone on the same page with ABC's mission and what we aim to do in the city. We're really a group of all volunteer advocates for more sustainable, denser, affordable housing that make our city a place we all want to live. So we're also, really dreaming of accomplishing a lot of things on housing affordability, more production, and tenants' rights. So we'll go through all of those topics here today. I also wanted to take a moment and welcome brand new members and folks who'd like to get involved. So our goal here really is to break down some of the barriers between public, city electeds, just further transparency and communication. So throughout this town hall, I just want to encourage folks to think of any questions or issues that you personally are especially interested in, and how you'd like to get more deeply involved in those issues in the city, with ABC specifically, or how you'd like to follow up with your elected officials. So that's my opener, and I'm going to turn it over to Alan to talk through some logistics and kick us off with Councillor McGovern and Mayor Siddiqui.
Yeah, welcome everybody. My name is Alan Sadoun. I am the other co-chair of A Better Cambridge. I will be doing most of the moderating tonight. There's not a lot to introduce. We are having a conversation with our two esteemed guests for the first hour. And the second hour, we will have other esteemed guests to have largely a similar conversation. I'm going to start off with a few broad questions, and then we're going to have some open discussion. So I guess, yeah, so how about we just start with some introductions. And actually, before we do introductions, I'm going to mention again that Councillor Simmons couldn't be here tonight because she is sick, but she is the chair of the City Council's Housing Committee, has been for many years, been a stalwart. We really miss her commentary tonight. But hopefully Councillor McGovern and Mayor Siddiqui know what she's up to as well as what they're up to and can comment on it. So I guess we'll get started with introductions. So could each of you, starting with Mayor Siddiqui, just take a few minutes to introduce yourself to the audience, talk about how you see the housing crisis, talk about what you in particular, anything you in particular are working on to address it?
Sure. Well, thank you, ABC, for hosting, and it's great to be here with everyone. I am on my third term on City Council, and when I joined the council, my colleagues like Councillor McGovern, former Mayor McGovern, and Councillor Simmons and former Mayor Simmons have done a lot of work proceeding, and I joined and also was able to co-chair the Housing Committee with Councillor Simmons, and under Councillor McGovern, I also was the chair of the Tenant Displacement Task Force, and then with last term with homelessness issues, I appointed Councillor McGovern as chair for the ad hoc for homelessness. So we've worked, very close together on a lot of this work. I grew up in Cambridge affordable housing at the Range Towers and Roosevelt Towers, and my parents still live in affordable housing at the Roosevelt Towers. So this issue is really important to me, and I think both Marc and I can speak to this. As the mayor's office, we're at the front line of the housing crisis. We see people who come to our offices who are really struggling, and the number one constituent matter is related to housing. And so over the years, the work I've been involved in has ranged from work around preserving the affordability at the towers, to pushing to increase legal aid funding, to leading the effort with many others on the council around having a tenants' rights and resources ordinance. And we can get into later, what tenant protection actually looks like, but Also have been involved in efforts with pushing to raise more money for home ownership programs. So there's been a range of work that I've been involved in, and I'm looking forward to talking about the specific topics related to affordable housing, affordability, and so forth. But I'm glad to be here. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor McGovern.
Thanks, Alan. Thank you to ABC, and thank you to everybody for being here. I too grew up in Cambridge, like Mayor Siddiqui, and have seen all the various changes that have happened, in our city over the years. Housing being really, the number one issue, and it has been for quite a long time. As the mayor said, we get calls, not, the mayor's office, but also individual counters. I had literally within the 2 hours before this meeting, I received 3 Facebook messages from people asking me for help to help them find a more affordable place in Cambridge, 2 of whom are parents of kids in the schools. So this is a constant everyday occurrence for the majority of us, hearing these stories and hearing from people that they're just, either getting priced out or and it's not just folks on the lowest income spectrum either. This is also, these are also folks that, these are teachers too, and that can't afford to live here. So it's a broad range of people. I'm a social worker by trade, and so I still continue to do a lot of that work, and do a lot of work on our unhoused community and supporting our unhoused community, as the mayor said. And so, that is a passion of mine as well. In terms of things that, that I've worked on, I think, as the mayor said, one of the best decisions I made as mayor was appointing the current mayor to lead the Tenant Protection Task Force, who issued a really great report with some really powerful recommendations, some of which we have acted on already, many still to come, and that we have to still do. But also the affordable housing overlay, which again, I know, was controversial in the city, but I stand behind that. And I think we're seeing some really good things happen with the overlay. The linkage fee, which we are again discussing currently, but a few years back, that linkage fee was at $4.56, I think it was, for about 20 years. And I was co-chairing the housing committee with Councillor Simmons, and we led that effort to raise it to $15 a square foot, and then dollar increases, moving forward. So now it's up, over 20, and that's produced millions of dollars for the Affordable Housing Trust. And then also the raising the inclusionary zoning, which was also at about 11.5% for 20 years. And we raised that to 20%, which is the highest percentage in the state. So I'm proud of that record. And I don't know if we're going to get into that later or now, but there are certainly some things that we are all working on together. And I'm really looking forward to not just this conversation, but just moving this whole housing conversation forward. So thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, so I mean, I guess we'll just dive in, and since there's only 2 of you, we have time for some back and forth on all these questions. So I guess let's start with affordable housing, because that is the thing that everyone tends to want to talk about. That is, so just for those who don't know, affordable housing means housing that's outside of the normal real estate market. It's set aside for people who meet certain criteria. It's life-changing for people who can get it. When we talk to people about affordable housing, some of the most common reactions we get, and we got these in the question submissions for tonight as well, are, I don't make enough for affordable housing, that affordable housing doesn't work for the lowest income or those with no income, or I make too much for affordable housing, I'm over the asset cap, but I still can't afford market rate housing. Or for those who are eligible, the wait list is over 20,000 families long, meaning you have to wait years. So how do we get to a place where affordable housing is a viable option for more people? I guess we'll start with Councillor McGovern.
This is obviously a very complex and layered problem, right? There is no silver bullet answer to this. And so, we have to look at a lot of different things. I mean, when you talk about the folks on the lowest end of the spectrum, a lot of folks who are unhoused, for example, who I work with, there's not enough vouchers. And there's been cuts in money that's at the state level and the federal level. And so it's really difficult to get somebody who doesn't have an income, a housing voucher. That list is really long as well. And it's also, not only is the list long, but the hurdles that people have to jump. Even just from needing a state ID. Well, I could go into the registry if I need an ID and I'll pay the, $35 or whatever it is, and that's fine. But I have my birth certificate, I have my social security card, I have my proof of residence, I have the money to do that. So it's, there's a lot that we have to look at in terms of just the system itself and the bureaucracy itself to how, people who have less resources, how do they even begin to access this very limited resource, that exist? So that's a whole other, sort of piece of this. But, the bottom line is, and, we just we have not permitted enough housing to be built. I'm not just talking about Cambridge, but I'm talking regionally. And so, there is a scarcity, right? And when there's a scarcity of things and things are in high demands, prices go up. And so, part of this is making sure that we're building more housing, and it has to be housing at very different levels. It's got to be housing that, is affordable to folks on the lower end of the socioeconomic status, and also for people, in the middle. The rich people that are coming are fine, and they're going to take care of themselves, and they can drop $2 million on a unit and whatever. But the folks on the lower end who have to go to CHA, Cambridge Housing Authority, they face that long list, that 20,000 give or take list. About 8,000 of those people are people who actually live or work in Cambridge, right? So you can get on any housing list in any community, regardless of whether you've even ever visited that community or not. So a lot of the people on that list are people that don't necessarily have a tie to Cambridge. But some of them are probably people who had lived here before and had to move and now want to come back. So, I think we've got to focus on we've got to fight this battle on lots of different fronts. It's about vouchers, it's about affordability, it's about production, it's about zoning. It's about, a change in the way we think about these things, right? And a lot of people in Cambridge, we like the way Cambridge is, and this idea of building more housing or my neighborhood changing, or, that's off-putting to some folks. But if we really care about this issue, then things are going to have to change. And so, not a perfect answer, but it's a very, very complex problem.
And, just to add on that, I think when you think about affordable housing and housing production, I think it's not just Cambridge, right? It has to be a regional approach, and a lot of other places, we're outdoing most of these places. But I think when it comes to, the market being the market, the reality is there's towns, cities around us that, I think with the housing choice bill, there's going to be more changes, but it's a tough sell. And I think we've been at the forefront of doing more because it's, we need it, and it's definitely the right thing to do. But it is a challenge because we're a region as well. So we're seeing these rents go up, and some of the new housing that's coming in, it's like $3,000-4,000 a month, right? And who can afford? There's a lot of people who can't afford that, and so we need affordable housing. And the way the city's really historically been able to have affordable housing is because we have affordable housing trust, which a lot of cities don't have, which as Councillor McGovern said, linkage fee, there's a lot of things that go into funding our trust. But we have to make sure if there's going to be affordable housing that there's still sources that continue to go into our trust, so that the trust can then fund various properties. And an example I have is the Leslie University was selling some property. There's going to be funding from the Affordable Housing Trust to purchase this property, and working, I think, with HRA. And so, the list goes on. There's a lot of examples of where we need to make sure there's funding coming into the trust so that we can keep building more affordable housing. We've mentioned inclusionary housing. So many of our units our affordable housing units come through the inclusionary program as well. And so I think that's something that, this council, I think one day will have to revisit, like 20%, could we go over, right? Like, I know people have been thinking about that, and how do we just increase the number of sheer affordable housing rental units? And then there's also affordable housing units. Last year was like probably the first time in a long time that we actually even funded inclusionary homeownership. And that was about 9 units. 9 units. That's it. 9 units. So I think, we have a lot more to do on that front in terms of affordable homeownership as well. We've done a lot, but I think it's going to take, a lot of these different things to push for more affordable housing. I'm not even getting to other strategies we can talk about. I think Councillor McGovern and I have, as a council, talked a lot about, building on city-owned lots, partnering with our universities. The list goes on. So I'll stop there, but I think it's a really complex question. But I think the city, in what it's done so far, we've really, been doing, the right, using the right strategies. I think now the question is, how do we just keep doing more?
Yeah, I hear you that there's a lot of strategies and this is really complex, but I think people would appreciate if we could you just lay out some of the specific things that, like, what is the council working on now in terms of like what is likely to come, and are some of these strategies pipe dreams, or some of these strategies things we can actually get done in the next year or two?
Councillor McGovern, do you want to talk about zoning?
Yeah. We just had a housing committee meeting yesterday. I think that was yesterday, wasn't it? Been a long day. Where we're looking at zoning changes that would allow multifamily housing to be built throughout the city and in neighborhoods where it's currently not allowed, as a way of producing more units. And then how would that actually work, right? It's one thing to do that and say, oh, change our table of uses and say multifamily housing is now allowed everywhere. That sounds great, right? But if you don't make other changes to actually figure out how the finances are going to work to make that happen, then you're just kind of being performative about it. So we're starting to kind of get in the weeds with that a little bit and have that conversation about, okay, let's not just say it, but how do we kind of do what we can to make sure that that happens? A few of us are working on some AHO amendments and ways to, make that a little bit better. We're talking about linkage fee again, which we're going to raise to $33 a square foot, $30 and some change a square foot, which is going to produce millions of more dollars. We have filed policies or home rule petitions around transfer fees, to try and help to generate more money. I mean, money is really sort of the key because everything is so expensive and it takes money. So, and especially when you're talking about affordable housing, where the way in which they get funded is very, very complicated, and they don't have the flexibility that a for-profit developer who's got a huge fund behind them. And so the Affordable Housing Trust really has to step up and put a lot of money towards those buildings. And so the more money the trust has, the more things we can do. But so linkage, looking at multifamily zoning, AHO, I mean, those are just some things that I've been involved in, we've all been involved in some capacity that are being kicked around. And I do think there are changes that can come. I don't think they're pipe dreams.
Yeah, I'll just add that I think we're going to continue to I think we have to look at our city-owned lots, and I think that has been a council priority, and I think we will probably be, I think we need some kind of plan for that. So I think the new city manager is excited about some of that. I've talked to him, you know, a lot, and I think others have too, about, you know, we have city-owned property. What is it, and what's our plan? And even I think we still have to think about not only city-owned property, but other property that we could be buying and be competitive. Or we you know, we look at what the universities, you know, we had a great example with Leslie, who said they wanted this to be affordable housing. How do we partner more with our local institutions? You know, MIT, I think Councillor McGovern, you were, I think, involved in this, but I think that house on Main Street is still there. So, you know, there's some things where like, okay, what's the timing? Finally, Cherry Street lot, that work is moving through. So there's stuff in the pipeline. You know, I think we've also, you know, been talking a little bit, you know, about how, I think Councillor McGovern, you and I have talked about this, but just our vouchers, right? And in Boston, the city of Boston's operating budget is used to administer like a local voucher program. And you know, how do we get creative too in some ways? And so there's a lot of things that the council is working on. Some of it's just how do we prioritize, how some of it's more long-term, right? And some of it's more short-term. I think zoning, it's going to be more long-term than not. You know, it took the affordable housing overlay longer than I think it should have, but we were able to move forward on it because we had more people on the council who were in favor. So, but I think zoning is going to be, that's a big project. But another area that is exciting is, you know, the Alewife quadrangle, right? We're looking at that right now, that area. There's a working group and stuff, but that has the potential to have a lot of housing. And I think we will have to really push for there to be a lot of housing there. And so those are some things that the council, you know, we need to make sure that we're pushing and prioritizing.
Now, you know, one thing the mayor just said a few minutes ago, that we've tried to push the city on. I'm hoping under the new leadership, there might be a different response. But the idea of the city being able to purchase more land so that we can then decide what happens with that. Now, you know, to the former manager's credit, that we did jump on the BB&N site, right? Which is, you know, and certainly the work that the mayor did, you know, with the city around preserving the 500 plus units at Ridge Towers, Freshmont Apartments, like that's huge. Where those people would have been gone, right? And so it's preservation as much, you know, as well as production. But you know, a lot of the project, Rebecca, you can help me. I'm blanking on the name. The HRI project that next to I remember the Burger King on Concord Ave.
It's Finch. Yeah, Finch project.
Thank you. You know, that property, that land, that sort of came about because the previous owner had a relationship with Rich Rossi when he was the manager at the time, and said, "Hey, I'm thinking about selling my property. What do you think?" And we got it at a sort of reduced rate, but you know, 9 times out of 10, 9.5 times out of 10, that hits the market. And before the city half the time even knows that property is available, look at the place that was on the Chinese food place that was on Fresh Pond Parkway. I mean, before we even knew that that place was available, it was sold. So this city we have to be much more aggressive in finding out what's available, what's coming on the market, and pouncing on that when we can, because government's just not as nimble as private people who can just write a check, right? And so we've got to be more aggressive, because then the city owns it, and we can have a conversation about what's the best use of it, as opposed to it going just to, you know, the private market.
So I did one more question on this before we move on to overall production. You know, you said something earlier that money is key. So, and the budget is controlled by the city manager, and we have a new city manager. So I guess broadly, can you comment on what are we looking from the new city manager in terms of I guess, overall approach to affordable housing, but especially in terms of money and the use of money. You mentioned the voucher system. Are we looking for changes to the voucher systems? What, yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I could start, I think right now we use 25% of our building permit revenue. And so what that looks like is, in FY 20, it was about almost 6 million. And then I think for this last budget, it was about 10. And so I think that's an area that we should have a conversation with our city manager, with the council, of how much should our budget, and building permit revenue reflect and go into affordable housing, right? So, I think, even CPA allocation, right? We just approved that. There's certain amounts that, I think this year or last year for FY 22 is 14, and then it was 15. How do we keep increasing those amounts? I think with the change of leadership also in the state, I think we'll see maybe more resources for our local housing authorities, and through the state. And so I think there's, a lot of potential there, and I think we also have to, think of other creative ways to, and we're, as Councillor McGovern says, the money, it's coming from linkage. It's coming from the budget, and in the budget, we can, I think we have a potential to talk about how much we want, right? But I think no number is going to ever feel big enough, right? But we have to really be doing it strategically. So I know the council is excited to have that conversation with the city manager.
Yeah. I've often, when I've looked at the budget and I look at the percentage of the budget that we spend on various departments and various things, we should probably be spending 10% of our overall budget on housing, right? So instead of, if it's a $700 million budget, then it's $70 million, right? And that's not what we're doing now. But that might be a good place to, have that conversation, because we do that for other departments. We spend about 10% on police. We're right in that ballpark on schools and other things. And so, housing, if it really is the number one issue that everyone, says that it is, then we should spend accordingly. And then I would say that, one of the things that under the previous administration, if the Affordable Housing Trust needed some money for a project, they would go to the city manager and they would say, we need $20 million, right? $10 million, whatever, for this particular project. The manager would then take that money out of free cash and allocate it to the Affordable Housing Trust. It would come before us, we'd vote it. But again, and he was pretty good about that, right? But it was always this extra step that made it really hard for the trust to move nimbly on projects and more quickly on projects, because then they had to go and they had to ask and they had to talk about it, and where's it going to come from? Then it has to go before the council. And where my argument to him was, you give this money all the time anyway, why not just put it in the budget and give it up front, so that the trust actually has it and they can then really, you have some flexibility in how they use that money. So, but that was kind of a non-starter with the previous administration. Maybe it'll be a different conversation under the new administration, but, not knowing if you're going to have the money, if you're on the trust, and not knowing, where that money is going to come from or how long it's going to take to get it, it makes it more complicated to say, oh, we want to buy this piece of land, or we want to work with Justice Start or HRI or whoever. Where if they had that money in their own budget and they knew they could count on it, it would allow us to move more quickly. So that's that's something I've been talking to him about, and we'll continue to talk to him about.
And just to add, sorry, one point, a fact is, if you look at the budget, to Councillor McGovern's point, the city, I think this budget cycle is, if you look at what was affordable housing, it was $38 million. So when you look at the overall budget, you look at how much is in free cash, you're kind of left wondering, with the caveat, there's a lot of other funding the city puts into, a topic around tenant displacement and a lot of other things. But I think if just looking at affordable housing, that number, it needs to be increased. So I think the council is definitely, that's a priority for us.
Yeah. And we often get trapped here and in Cambridge where, we do a lot of things better than and more than other communities. We really do. And there is a lot to applaud. But then we sometimes say, oh, well, we're spending more than Somerville and Boston or, or whatever. That doesn't mean we're spending enough. It just means they're spending a lot less than they should as well. So,
Right.
Yes, we're doing a lot of things. I mean, when we go to, the mayor and I go to any kind of conference, or I was just out in Portland earlier in the spring at a housing conference, and all these things that they talk about are that cities should be doing, we're doing like 95% of them, and Cambridge is often used as an example. Still not, we still haven't figured it out, and we're still not necessarily doing enough just because we're doing more than other places.
Yeah. So speaking of still not enough, I guess that's probably the theme of the entire night. But I wanna pivot to housing production as a topic. So we currently have a rental vacancy rate that is less than half of 1%. So 99.5, over 99.5% of all apartments on the market right now are unavailable. There's a lot of people looking for apartments. There are not very many options for them to choose from. As Cardi B put it, I think this morning or yesterday, there just isn't any inventory. To put this into context, between 1980 and 2019, we added over 45,000 jobs to Cambridge, but in the same period, we only built 13,000 homes for workers to live in. So what are we doing to turn these numbers around and get more housing built? And I guess, will that be enough? Like, do these efforts add up? I guess we'll start with the mayor.
I think this is a hard one of, we have a city that is this region is really, people want to move here and come here and live here. And then we have a wait list that's 20,000 people. I think our goal should be to build as much housing as possible, right, to accommodate. I think with that said, there are barriers, right? There's, whether that's zoning, and we're trying to fix that, whether that's funding, and you've heard what we're trying to do there. There's also, I think, state leadership, right? And what the governor can maybe do around some of this, but it's multiple strategies. So, I think as far as production, I think we've laid out some of the things that we're trying and looking at. But I don't know, Councillor McGovern, do you have any new points?
Well, I mean, I think, those numbers, thank you, Madam Mayor. I think those numbers aren't unique to Cambridge. I mean, Boston's not producing, enough either. And, you drive through some of the suburban communities, where developments are being talked about, and you get signs on everybody's lawn, stop the, whatever the building's called. And so there needs to be more pressure, and there has been the public transit. Alan, remind me what exactly it was called. I told you we got to do these things early.
Oh, the MBTA communities law.
Yeah, and then where they changed the number of votes needed to change zoning, to a majority from a super majority. Those things can help, right? Look, can we build our way out of this alone? No, probably not. I mean, we could add, we could probably add 80,000 units to Cambridge and we would fill them, right? But what I could tell you is not building housing doesn't work either, right? And this idea that somehow supply and demand doesn't apply to Cambridge, right? There's far more people who want to live here than we have apartments for. And if we're just say, oh, let the market take care of it, the people who have more money are going to win that every single time. And we're going to continue to see lower income people and middle income people pushed out of the city. And so the Metro Boston Housing Report Card that gets produced every couple of years, they always talk about that you need to see about a 5% vacancy rate, maybe it's 5.5% vacancy rate before you see rents start to come down. Well, we're at less than 1%. Okay, so yes, we're doing a lot, but there is a lot more that we need to do if we want to see rents start to come down. But I think, I do think that again, we need other communities to join us in this, and some are. Watertown's doing a lot. Waltham's actually stepping up a little bit more, and that's all good. And then you get into, again, how layered all this stuff is. We need a much better public transportation system, right? I mean, the way we think about distance in Massachusetts, if I said to any of you right now, hey, let's meet in Worcester for dinner tomorrow because there's a great restaurant, you would all think I was out of my mind. Right. But in most other places around the country, a 45-minute, Worcester would be a suburb of Boston on some level. Right. And here it's like the end of the earth. If we had high-speed rail where someone could get to Kendall Square in 20 minutes to work, but could live in Worcester, that would help too. Right. But God, I'll settle for trains not catching on fire, at this point. So it's very layered. But again, those numbers don't lie, right? And clearly, those people who are coming here to work want to live here because this is a great place to live. And if they're getting paid higher salaries and, they can outbid a teacher, then that's what's going to happen. And so we have to produce more.
So talk to me a little bit about what we're doing here, because you mentioned the housing choice bill that takes the threshold down from a super majority to a simple majority, but you still have to have a simple majority for something. And I know that this is kind of a complicated question because sometimes zoning stuff originates with CDD. Sometimes production doesn't happen with zoning at all; it happens through the planning board or the board of zoning appeal. But a lot of this is ultimately controlled by the council. So if we're talking about council action, what is the council doing on this stuff? And if we're talking about CDD or the planning board or the board of zoning appeal, how do you see your relationship to those bodies, and what are those bodies doing to get us out of this?
Well, we were both very involved in the project on Mass Ave. And, that was a prime example of when I think there was majority council support and there was a lot of community support, but ultimately the zoning board, didn't agree, right? And so one action that this council is taking is to look at how we diversify boards and commissions. And there will be a response around this pretty soon. There's been a lot of back and forth, as you can imagine, and this council has talked a lot about stipends, right? And just making it easier for people who maybe have lived life experience, who have different backgrounds, to also be being able to participate in the board of zoning and the planning board. And so that's something that hopefully is happening. And we did have a charter review question on this too. Given all of that, what we were seeing, there was so much control that the zoning board had, and we really didn't have a say. So that's one concrete thing that is underway, that we are looking to diversify our boards and commissions.
And that's, I think of that 2072 Mass Ave, project and just an example of, first of all, it was an example of something that checked all the boxes that we talk about and the goals that the city council and the city have put forward. It was environmentally friendly. It was on a main corridor. It was close to transit. Family size, 70% were family size units, 100% affordable. And it didn't happen. And, when I think of that process, the BZA, there's a woman of color who's an associate member of the BZA who works in affordable housing and lived in affordable housing, who wasn't assigned to that case, a 100% affordable housing project. Her voice wasn't heard, right? And so the decision was made by, again, this is not, about the individuals. They are, we are who we are. I am who I am, but it was not a diverse group of people making that decision. And so you know, we have to think about how we address that, because we talk, you know, we love diversity in our city, but yet, you know, sometimes we don't like diversity of opinion, and sometimes the diversity isn't represented in the people making the decisions, right? And so that that is something we need to, you know, we need to think about. And it's, as the mayor said, I mean, it's also about how do you can want diversity, but you have to get, people have to apply, people have to be willing. I mean, it's, you know, being on the planning board or the BZA, I mean, they all work incredibly hard, they don't get paid, you know, I do appreciate all of that a lot, but there are a lot of people who couldn't do that, right, because of the amount of time that it takes, and so we have to think about all of that. You know, the council's, you know, you asked Alan sort of what is the council doing? I mean, this, you know, the council's working on this rezoning in that meeting that happened yesterday, right? We're a bunch of, you know, it's also, you know, there's a lot of things going on that because of the open meeting law and whatever, it's only a few people can work on this thing while a few people are working on that other thing, and we can't talk to each other about it. And so there is, you know, there's even some mystery among ourselves, right? The mayor brought up the permitting fees and raising money. She's been in conversations with that. I've been in conversations with that. I didn't know she was having those conversations, and she probably didn't know that I was having those conversations. So there are some hamstrings that happen. But, you know, but the AHO amendments and ABC, you guys were great at sort of pushing the AHO and championing that. You know, but, you know, how do we make that better? You know, so the linkage fee again. So, I mean, the council is intricately involved, and whether it comes from CDD or sometimes it comes from the community or it comes from us directly. So there are a lot of balls in the air right now on this, and I hope that, you know, on one hand, you don't want to rush things through, but on the other hand, the longer we take, the more people, you know, suffer the consequences of that. And so it's finding that sweet spot of making sure you do your due diligence, but not, you know, having 57 meetings that take 4 years while people are suffering and can't find housing. So we got to find that sweet spot.
I think, and maybe it's a good time to talk about tenant protections, because, you know, we did, you know, okay, so I will not try to make a smooth transition. That was going to fail. Okay, so the question: the housing shortage has exacerbated what was already a huge power imbalance between tenants and landlords. Nearly every renter in Cambridge has some kind of landlord horror story to tell. I talked to someone the other day who had a 40% rent hike. You know, refusing to deal with mold, discrimination in the leasing process, harassment, getting evicted for renovations with little notice. Officially, we have rights, but in practice, it's really hard to get those rights enforced. So I guess my question is the same as the last two. What's the plan? Are things going to get better? I think, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, you know, there's so much to say here. I'll touch on a few things, and then I know Councillor McGovern has things to say on this as well. You know, tenant displacement, we're really limited in what we can do legally because, you know, just we don't, you know, there's no local rent control, there's no rent stabilization because of something called Chapter 40P. And so we're really limited in what we can do. And, you know, a lot of the concerns that have come up the last, 6 months, people are raising the rent, right? Hey, Mayor Siddiqui, this person, this landlord just raised my rent, you know, $1,000. Legally, we can't do anything, and it's really, really frustrating. The minimum I'll do is I'll call and just being like, this person can't afford it. Please reconsider, you know. But I think it's rarely that it's a private market. They're going to do what they want to do. There are some landlords who, you know, there are a lot of good landlords in Cambridge who will keep the rent below market, and I think we've talked about how we see more of that and how we, you know, it's in Envision. And I think, again, it's hard to do things because of, you have to get permission from the state. And if you do home rule, for the last many years, those home rules fail. I think with the change in governor, you know, we may see some more change. So I think both of us were very, we both supported, looking at, supporting the state bill around, tenant protections and so forth, but we weren't able to do much. So what can we do, right? So I think one thing that we've have to keep doing is funding our nonprofit legal aid providers. I'm a legal aid attorney, and what I've seen is these attorneys are really, they're like the front line, right? You get an eviction notice, we're just referring to our providers. So we need to make sure we keep funding them. I'm in constant conversation with De Novo, with Cambridge and Somerville Legal Services about what their needs are. These organizations, have gotten a lot of funding over the years, but again, it's never enough. And so they want to keep hiring housing attorneys. And so that's a key strategy that the city does use. And it's not an official right to counsel. Again, that failed at the State House, that bill around right to counsel. And so did the one around eviction ceiling. But again, these were all efforts that this council, we really wanted to support. But again, the state and local, we can aspire to push on a lot of these things, but ultimately they fail on the state level. So it's difficult because we want to be doing all these things, but we don't have the permission. So we have to kind of keep trying to figure out how we push the state on some of this. And I think there are a lot of people at the state level who are trying to do that. I think information and tenant education is really key. I think people don't necessarily know their rights. And so that point, our city does do a lot of work around tenant education and tenant rights. And we have a tenant rights and resources ordinance that we have in place that should be given by a landlord at the start of the lease. And there should be information on legal services at the end of the lease. How that's enforced, I think, I've had discussions with Maura Penzak on it. It's something that we have been providing to residents proactively. And obviously we've reached out to management companies and, there has been participation, but I think tenant education is a big part of that. I'll stop there and I'll let Councillor McGovern say more.
I think you hit a lot of what I was going to say. In some respects, our hands get tied a little bit, but there are some things we're trying to find the ways in which what we can control, and what we can do, like the legal aid and the information. I get calls from people all the time that say, "Oh, I got a letter from my landlord that I have to be out, in 2 weeks," and I'm like, "Nope, you don't." An eviction is a formal legal process that has to go, that people have to go through. So let's take a step back, but people don't know, what their rights are. I do think, and the mayor said this too. I mean, I do want to be careful. We do have a lot of good landlords out there. I know people have a vision of, every landlord is, Scrooge McDuck sitting on their pile of coins. That wasn't my grandmother when she was alive and was a landlord, right? And so, I don't want to put everybody in the same bucket, but certainly we have a lot of landlord. What we see a lot of, we didn't talk about condo conversion, right? And that's something we didn't talk about it tonight. We've been talking about it. One of the things that happens is, and I was really involved in this, this was happening in East Cambridge a couple of years ago, where a developer bought 2 houses. It was maybe 12, 14 units. People who had been living there forever, most of them, they were a tenant at wills, right? They didn't have formal leases, because the landlord who was there before was an old time Cambridge guy, and it was all very sort of casual and it all worked well. And then this developer comes in, says, "I'm jacking up the rents to the point that nobody could afford them so that they would have to leave." And then he converts to condos. And we had to, we brought him before the housing committee and were able to, figure some things out for the majority of the people. Some people did leave, but we were able to buy some time, for some of the folks. But that's another area that we have to, to look at and think about, because there's ways, even though the condo conversion policy itself would require that, he couldn't do that right away. He has to give people, if you're over, if you're considered a senior, it's 2 years. But the way they get around it is they say, well, now I'm going to raise your rent $2,000, that nobody can stop me from doing that. And then the people leave and now the apartment's empty and they can just go ahead and convert. So that has to be thought about as well.
And one thing I'll just add is, I think you mentioned like residents who have maybe not working things at their house, or what can be done. We can contact the inspectional services, and inspectional services can write up citations. And so I think that's something that a lot of residents don't know, that there is a mechanism to have your landlord who may, if something is unsafe, to have them come in and do something. Another thing is, something I worked on with the vice mayor is the last few weeks, or not last few weeks, last 6-7 months, we were really keenly, and we were still involved. I'm very involved, but Walden Square is coming, sorry. Thought I sent my emails off. This is how many I get every minute. So we saw that they're going up to the trust for some money for Walden Square too. I'm supportive of more housing on that site. What I was getting, a lot of residents who are reaching out were saying, our current housing is horrible. So, we have so many bed bugs. It's not habitable. So, we wrote a really strong letter to the management and, the heads of, the president. It all got to the president and so forth, and not the president, but the president of the company. But it was that important. So since then, they said, okay, they basically were caught in, they were like, you're not wrong. We've really not done a great job with our property. So for the last, many months, we are engaging. We've done community meetings there. We're making tangible improvements to their way of life. Everything from making sure these residents are getting reimbursed for having to throw out furniture for bed bugs, and that list is long, to simple lights in the hallway, to just basic things like mold in the bathroom. Like, so many residents are fearful of complaining to management, and I think that if that's one thing, like if people know who are listening in and know tenants who could use more advocacy, that's what we're here for too. I think we want to fix kind of the current conditions as well. People don't talk about that enough. So I wanted to add that to the tenant displacement piece. I think a lot of it we have to fix. There's some housing here that is affordable housing and it's not in great condition.
Okay, I think we're almost out of time. So I guess from each of you, what is a, if you want the audience, an audience member to have one thing that they take away, or if someone's interested in getting more involved and wants to know what to do, what would you say is the takeaway or the call to action here? Starting with, I don't know, Councillor McGovern.
Sure. So, I know it can be, people are stretched for time, and sometimes public meetings, community meetings, neighborhood association meetings are not always the most exciting at times, right? It can feel like, what are we doing? But people need to get involved, and they need to show up at meetings. They need to, certainly email us, but but certainly, be involved. And it's hard because a lot of when we're talking about building new housing, it's often for people who aren't here yet, right? So the people, it's not, those 20,000 people that are on the waiting list often don't, for a whole host of reasons, don't show up to these meetings. And so their voices are not always heard. And so how do we really do a much better job of making sure we're getting more diverse voices to the table, and that the people who are most in need are elevated, that their voices are elevated in this conversation. So, you know, as much as people can take part in those conversations, I think the better. You know, look, I'm pro housing. I don't apologize for it, you know, and it's all different types of housing. We need low income housing, we need middle income housing, you know, in particular, and you know, that's going to mean that the city's going to look a little different. You know, we're a small city in terms of space, and my plan to annex Belmont hasn't worked. I'm just kidding. Anyone attached to people in Belmont, but we only have certain space, which means you're going to see things going up, right? Things are going to get taller because you can build taller. I think that's you know, depending on lots of different circumstances. I personally don't have an issue with that. But again, this is, you know, we can't say that we need more housing and housing is our number one issue and then, you know, fight it to the death every time it's being proposed. So let's move forward. Let's, you know, stick to our values. Let's be a community that is the welcoming community that we all want it to be. Even if that means that my personal life or your personal life is going to be maybe it will take you 10 extra minutes longer to get home at night, but you end up with 70 units of family-friendly housing on the corner of Mass Ave. You know, it's a sacrifice I'm willing to make, and I hope other people are too. Thank you. And thanks for having me.
Thank you. Mayor Siddiqui, round us out.
Yeah, you know, I think I wouldn't be here without the affordable housing in Cambridge. And so, you know, for me, you know, I think as long, in addition to the council, we're really all committed to, most of us, to seeing more housing and more affordable housing in particular, and to continue to be even a more welcoming community. I think right now the reality is there's a lot of more work to do. And I think while we've done and employed a lot of the strategies you heard from both of us tonight, the work is incomplete. And so we're going to keep working on it. If you have ideas, if the public who's watching has ideas, and we want to be doing everything as much as possible, but we also need, you know, we can't do it alone. So thank you for having us.
Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for everyone who's in the audience. Don't leave. We're going to take like a 2-3 minute break before we switch to the second session. But if you are leaving, reminder to join the ABC mailing list to stay informed. We share council updates, we share news articles, we share event announcements. Send us any questions if you have them. Don't be afraid to contact City Councillor if you're curious about something they said. And if you want to advocate with us, become an ABC member. We watch city council meetings together. We discuss policy together. We do tabling and canvassing and advocacy together. It's a great community to be a part of. Thank you so much. We will be right back in 2-3 minutes.
Talk soon. Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Ready. And we're recording. Great. So I think I'm expecting that most people stuck around. I hope so. And excited to welcome our next set of counselors. My name is Becca Schofield. I'm a co-chair of ABC along with Alan. Welcome. We want to first just ABC's mission, kind of advocating for more sustainable, equitable housing in the city. We're all volunteers. We're really excited to be able to chat with counselors about issues we care about. And the goal of this is to introduce new members, folks that aren't necessarily very involved as part of the public, or ABCers that talk to counselors all the time. Just get a little more face time and hear where we're at with some issues that we really care about related to housing, both affordability and preserving that, and production, building new, and tenants' rights. So we'll focus on all of those issues, mostly just hear what's been going on and what we're hoping to do in the near future and dreaming for future. So I guess I would just, you know, again, say for folks on the line, in the broader public, we're really excited to have you plug into ABC. We hope that you're brainstorming as you hear from these counselors, all the ideas and things you want to do and things you might want to advocate for. So please take down our info, reach out, and looking forward to hearing from this group.
Hey, everybody. My name is Alan Sadoun. I'm the other co-chair of A Better Cambridge. I will be moderating this evening. So yeah, I guess we will dive into it. We're going to start with a few canned questions, and if we have time, we'll have some more open discussion. But I guess we'll start with introductions. We are honored tonight to have Councillor Burhan Azeem, Vice Mayor Alanna Mallon, and Councillor Paul Toner of the Cambridge City Council. And I was wondering if you could all each take a few minutes to introduce yourself, talk about how you see the housing crisis, and talk about anything that you in particular are working on to address it. Let's start with Vice Mayor Mallon.
Oh, hi. Hi, everybody. Thanks for being here. I got the honor of going first with my colleagues, even though I feel like Burhan gets called on first at city council meetings. So it's nice to be in the hot seat for the first time. My name is Alanna Mallon. I'm serving my third term on the Cambridge City Council, and I am currently the vice mayor. I've lived in Cambridge for 18 years with my husband and my two kids, both who are now at the high school. So I have seen Cambridge over the last 20 years change, and I've seen the housing crisis really come to where we are right now through a lot of work that I did in providing resources for residents in poverty. I don't know if many of you know, I started a program here called the Weekend Backpack Program back in 2013, which sends food home to kids on the weekend, and then started working at Food for Free. And I still am there at the nonprofit. We do food advocacy and food insecurity work. So I'm very familiar with really what's going on here in Cambridge and how housing is so fundamental. And it is something that myself and my colleagues that are joining me here tonight and that were in the first session work very, very closely on, trying to attack at a lot of different ways. As we know, the housing crisis, there is no magic bullet. We need to be looking on to take on these big things in terms of creating more housing, but we also need to look at those small pieces and put the pieces of the puzzle together. So I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to talk a little bit with all of you and with my colleagues around the advocacy pieces that ABC fits in and how you can help. So I'm going to leave it there and turn it over to whomever is on the hot seat next.
That would be Councillor Toner.
Hi, so my name's Paul Toner and I'm in my first 9 months. This is my first term as a city councillor. I actually have lived here in Cambridge my whole life, and I have the great fortune of living in my great grandfather's house. And my children are actually 5th generation growing up in Cambridge, going to the Cambridge public schools. And, you know, I really treasure that. I have had that luxury of living here in Cambridge and benefiting from it. But I've also, as Vice Mayor Mallon said, have seen a great deal of change from growing up here as a kid myself, and then serving as a teacher in East Cambridge for a number of years, and you know, just seeing the change since the end of rent control. And there's, you know, a lot of you know, good things that happened as a result of it. You know, the city, I think, is you know, seen a lot of you know, improvements in a lot of ways, but at the same time, it really destabilized the economic diversity that we saw in the city. And we really have become a city where a handful of people like myself bought the house from my mother, you know, at the right time. We're able to buy a house, and then you know, there's a shrinking middle class in the city, and we have you know, the people who can afford the luxury condos, and what few homes become available on the market, and then, you know, folks who rely on government support to get housing. And we really have to work on all those people in the middle. So as Vice Mayor Mallon said, and I caught the tail end of Councillor McGovern and the mayor, you know, we need to be about all levels of housing for the residents of the city. And, you know, we can't do it alone, so we have to take a regional approach as well, but we can do more. And I look forward to working with the whole council to try to increase the number of units that we have available at all price points through the city.
Councillor Azeem.
Thank you. Hi, all, everyone. My name is Burhan. I'm a city councillor, also in my first term, 9 months. I'd like to add that I'm not the newest city councillor. They do it by last name. So I'm actually senior councillor to Councillor Toner.
He likes to say that at every meeting at this point.
It's definitely like the thing I hang on to. I've not been in Cambridge as long as other people. I was born in Pakistan and moved around a lot as a kid. I've lived here now about a decade. I will say like the housing crisis is definitely like front of mind to me. Um, uh, we talk about what it's like and, what the conversation is around housing. And like, it's something that I think about all the time. Like, this is my room. You can see it's like about the size of 2 beds. But like, this is all the space that I get to myself. Councillor Mallon and I were talking, Vice Mayor Mallon and I were talking this morning about why I'm always in the city council space and working there. And it's just because like, it's a very small space at home and it's really, really hard. And it's really hard for a couple of reasons. It's hard because there's just a shortage, first of all, right? Regardless of whether you can afford it or not, when I was moving apartments in the middle of February this year, there was just like only 5 apartments on the market, period. We have a very low vacancy rate at the moment, between 1 and 0.5%. And so there's just not that many apartments, regardless of what you can afford, that you can buy or rent. And that makes it really difficult for people. And so just having more housing, period. There's also like a large percent of the population that just can't afford Cambridge because it's so expensive. And so thinking about how we can provide subsidy either implicitly through, inclusionary units that are like that are restricted to income, or providing that subsidy directly through our affordable housing trust fund and just buying units and making them affordable is an important part of it. And then finally, it's like, regardless of if you're able to find an apartment, it's about protecting tenants and how you can make sure that they have appropriate rights and are protected. There's a lot of horror stories about, as I was going through the apartment process and renting myself this year, about like people who, had like rodents in their apartments, or their landlords were renting them illegal apartments that just didn't have windows, or the electricity went out occasionally. And when you're in a shortage and people are just desperate enough just to find a place to live, a lot of landlords and like other people can just get away with things that just aren't like what we expect of housing in Cambridge. And so having high standards for our housing, like we do for everything else in terms of food quality and other things like that, is really important. And so I think that those are kind of the few areas of focus that I think about.
Thank you. So I guess we'll dive in, start with talking about affordable housing, and I'll be more transparent about the order this time. We're going to go to Councillor Azeem, then Councillor Mallon, then Councillor Toner. But so affordable housing, for those who know, it's housing that's outside of the normal real estate market for people who meet certain criteria. It's life-changing for people who can get it. When we talk to people on the street, when we got the submissions for this town hall, a lot of the things we hear are, I don't make enough for affordable housing. It's not available for the very poorest. Or I have too much in the way of assets or income to qualify for affordable housing, but I still can't hack into the Cambridge market. Or even for those who are eligible, the wait list is over 20,000 families long. So you probably have to wait for years. So how do we get to a place where affordable housing is a more viable option for more people? And what are we doing right now about that?
I guess I'm starting, right?
Yes, sorry.
No, that's a good question. I would say that there's 2 parts to it. So we have 2 different mechanisms that kind of come to mind immediately for affordable housing. The first is our inclusionary program, right? Which is that, like, if you think of like Market Central in Central Square, 20% of the units in that building are affordable. And I think that, we could allow more buildings that have that 20% inclusionary number. Most of our development that has been since we passed inclusionary has been in very high buildings in Alewife, and then a few spattering of like Market Central and 3 or 4 other buildings. But we haven't seen that many buildings, and that's partially because the inclusionary requirement is great. I support it, and I think that we want as much affordable housing as we can. We also want to make sure the numbers work such that we actually get those affordable housing units built. And so that's something that we could focus on and think about. And the other is like our direct subsidy, right? Like we buy affordable housing and build it ourselves through our Cambridge Housing Authority, through Justice Start and all the nonprofits. And a lot of that work is supported by Affordable Housing Trust. And so increasing funds for that through the linkage conversation that we're having now and other sources is a really important piece of the puzzle as well.
Vice Mayor?
Oh, hi, thanks. This is a tricky one. I feel like we all work with families and residents. We hear this a lot. I think one of the things we try to do, because you're right, the affordable housing is typically between 30 and 80% AMI. And our AMI is, you know, for a family of 4, it's 30,000 to 80,000. So you make more than 80,000, you know, you don't qualify for affordable housing, but you can't quite afford the rent here either. One of the things we worked on with Cambridge Side Galleria with their new housing that's going over there is adding an 80 to 100% category, so that there is a category of housing that is going to be between 80 and 100% of AMI. So it kind of is trying to catch some of those folks. What we heard from CDD is if you go above 100%, people can then go into the market and those apartments stay empty. So that's one thing that I think, you know, we can really look at once those are online, trying to figure out, is that something that is a mechanism that people are interested in, and how do we make sure that we're including those in future projects. The other thing is, you know, we have a Homebridge program, an affordable first home ownership program. They're not well used because they're not easy to use, and you can't, it's not a wealth creator, and it's not, you can't pass it down to your children, right? So when we talk about affordable housing, we are talking about rental units, but we should also be talking about affordable home ownership and how we are going to start proliferating across the city this idea of, like, we have a program, how do we make it usable so people use it? And we're getting more people into homes that they can start that wealth creation, right? Like, it's been a step into the middle class for a long time, and people are getting shut out. So yes, we can talk about, you know, affordable rental opportunities, and we should be targeting them across the city and where we can. But I really think we should be looking at the Homebridge program, and the mayor and myself really put that forward last year. CDD is looking into how we can update that program so it's workable and more residents can access those homes when they become available.
Councillor Town?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to just say ditto, but I'll ditto what's been said. But I also think what we need to do, and I know ABC has been actively on this, and I know my fellow councillors have as well, but you know, I think we really do need to look at upzoning around all the transportation centers, the Porter Squares, the Harvard Squares. You know, we need to really have more density and height in those areas. And I won't say too much, but I've also, you know, spoken to a few of my fellow councillors about, I want to get ahead of the debates and actually talk about, you know, reviewing zoning. And I know Councillor Azeem has also mentioned this as well. It's like, take a really holistic look at the zoning in some areas of our city, because I think there's opportunities for people to, you know, grow and reinvest and redevelop properties that they've just been sitting there untouched for 50 years because of the zoning. And if we take a new look at the zoning, that I think there's a good balance between the residential folks that are here in the various neighborhoods now with what we really need going forward. You know, one area I think we have to take a good look at is the entire Mass Ave corridor. I think in some areas, you know, we can go significantly higher, as I said, around transportation nodes, but in other areas, probably at least double, if not, you know, triple the height that's there now. There are a lot of one-story retail buildings along Mass Ave that I could certainly imagine 3 or 4 stories of apartments or, you know, whatever being built there. But right now, you know, there's not the incentive. So I think we have to work with folks. And I also think we have to, Cambridge has a lot of tools in its toolbox, as has been mentioned, inclusionary zoning and linkage fees and various other things. But I don't know if they're working the way they originally thought they were going to work holistically. And I think we need to maybe go back and look at it. I really do. I appreciate Councillor Azeem's suggestion on the linkage fee discussion. I thought we were actually going to tier it even more, but you know, he came in with a pretty straightforward proposal for us to discuss, and maybe going forward we can think more about it. But I think on some of these you know, schemes that we have in place to encourage housing or develop funding for housing, I think we need to maybe look at more of a progressive tiered system, or also, as Councillor Carlone mentioned in meeting the other night, you know, even looking at, depending on what use the building has, you know, maybe it's a different, you know, different rate for different uses and things. So.
Yeah, I think we have time for follow-up comments. Councillor Azeem?
Thank you. One other thing that I wanted to add that would be a much longer term project, but I've had some conversations with our new city manager and some other councillors about is you know, affordable housing in general is really expensive to build, and it requires a subsidy per unit that can be quite large. And that makes it just that our affordable housing trust, you know, will always be income limited. One thing that really works is actually doing, you know, instead of just affordable housing, which also has the negative consequences of people who make near the median income can't afford it. If you make it more of a social housing program, such as like they are now trying in parts of New York and California, what happens is you get a lot of natural cross subsidy. So you build a building that has people, that has some units for people who make 30% of AMI, 50%, 70%, 100%, and then maybe even slightly above median at 120%. And then the cost of actually building that housing decreases exponentially because you can get some natural like subsidy from housing. And so that's something that we've had a little bit of a conversation about. That will be like a much longer conversation because you'd have to restructure how our housing authorities work and potentially even create a new organization. But as we think on the longer term around, you know, figuring out how to get around the affordability problems of building subsidized housing, I think that's a really key component.
I guess I'll open it up to the others because you mentioned the city manager, and I know that the new city manager, you know, something someone said in the previous session was money is key, and the city manager kind of controls a lot of the money when it comes to affordable housing. So, is there anything about affordable housing that you are that any of y'all are looking for from the new city manager in particular?
Being new, I don't have the history, and I don't mean as a cop out, but I'll just say that I hope that the new city manager at CDD will work, you know, more closely with us on setting priorities. We're actually going to be having a retreat with the new city manager in a week or two, where we, you know, I do think as a council we have a lot of ideas and a lot of things we all want to accomplish. I think we have to hone in on, you know, 4 or 5 or 6 things, and really, as a team, come up with a strategy for how we're going to move forward on that. And affordable housing, climate issues, transportation, those are all things that we have said, or councilors before myself have said are the priorities that we want to focus on. So I think giving him a roadmap of what we really want him to prioritize will be very helpful.
And if I can just jump in and follow that for a second, I think it's a great question. I think one of the things we heard loud and clear during the city manager search process, I certainly heard from, you know, all the comments and the many, you know, focus groups that we did, was we really wanted somebody who was interested and wanted to be a partner with us to be creative around affordable housing. And, you know, one of the things the previous city manager did was looking at like building permit fees, for example, right? And taking some of those building permit fees and throwing those into the affordable housing trust, right? I think our previous city manager was very creative around finding funding sources. And I hope that that continues. But I also think, as Councillor Toner mentioned, there are ways for us to be like really holistically looking at the whole system. How are we thinking about this, not in just in a building permit fee vacuum or affordable housing trust vacuum or a linkage fee vacuum? Like, how are we really going to be creative together to kind of really grapple with this very thorny problem together as, you know, city leadership and city council? I think that's the part that I'm most looking forward to, is the partnership that I think that Ian is bringing to the table, and is why we hired him.
Cool. I think we'll move on to the next question about housing production. So this is going to be Councillor Toner, Councillor Azeem, and then Vice Mayor Mallon. So generally speaking, I think this was alluded to earlier, we have a really low rental vacancy rate. Almost all of the apartments on the market are unavailable. There's a lot of people looking for apartments. There are not very many options for people to choose from. And you know, the number that I always bring up for this is between 1980 and 2019, we added over 45,000 jobs to Cambridge, but in that same time period, we only built 13,000 homes for workers to live in. So what are we doing to turn these numbers around and just get more housing built, period? You know, what is the council currently working on? What has the council been working on the past couple of years? And will that be enough? Is more needed? And if so, what more are we going to do on this?
Yeah, so one is the various tools that are in the toolbox I mentioned earlier, which again, they're nice to have, and they've provided some housing opportunities, but not nearly enough. I mean, I think in the Affordable Housing Trust right now, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but it's $45 million right now. And that gets you what, maybe 60 potential units of affordable housing at the rates that at least we've seen. And I just came from, prior to this meeting, I went and just listened in onto the Alewife Quad presentations and discussions. I mean, there's sort of the big frontier for right now, where we have to make sure that as we talk about redeveloping that neighborhood and working with the folks over there, that we get as much housing squeezed in over there as possible, as well, with amenities and green space and others, but there'll be a limit to that. I think we need to look at, I think, going back to what I said earlier, I think we have to look at places like Mass Ave and other places like Cambridge Street and Hampshire Street, and places where there might be the potential for, expanded development in those areas. And I'm not, I've said this to you when I interviewed you before, I'm not talking about all glass and steel towers in residential neighborhoods, but places where there's only 1 or 2 stories of housing that could maybe have 3 or 4 or 5 stories of housing. That would double what we have. So I think we should be looking at that as well. Any opportunities that the city can, reasonably buy a property. And I forget who gave me this idea, and Becca knows my wife. It might have been my wife, or it might have been one of my other councillor colleagues. But I think going forward, and it's too late to do this right now on some of the projects we have, but I think anytime the city talks about building a school building or any other public use building, we should be thinking about, well, okay, the first 2 floors can be the school. Why don't we build 5 stories on top of it, for housing as well? I mean, I know it might have been one of you at ABC that gave me that idea, but I mean, I think it's something we should definitely be thinking about, because we own the land. That's our footprint. And, in my visits to New York City, visiting schools, there's schools in, apartment skyscrapers, so I think we have to, think out of the box a bit on how we use the properties we currently own. It could be office space and housing, mixed use spaces. So
Boston is doing this with their whole library network.
oh, great.
So they're putting out RFPs for first studies, and then for developers to do proposals. And Upham's Corner is moving forward as a mixed use project with housing and the library renovation.
Councillor Azeem?
Thank you, Alan. And so I think it's an interesting problem of thinking about how much housing we need. We have a goal from Envision, which is to build about 10,000 new units by the end of the decade. And I think that's one goal to think about, because that's already into research and things like that, as like one thing to stabilize to some extent prices. And I think that there's a lot of different pieces that we're working on. Things that we should expect this term is that we just started having a conversation around, we've been having a conversation for many years now on single family zoning, but we still had our first housing committee hearing on it this term. And I think that was really helpful to get us started on that process about like, where do we want to allow triple deckers throughout the city? And I think that that's a very productive and healthy conversation. We also have 2 big zoning initiatives that are kind of instigated by the city that'll come through this term, which is around Alewife and also on Cambridge Street. And I think that those are 2 like very interesting potential avenues as well. I agree with Councillor Toner that I think that the corridors offer a really high opportunity, right? Mass Ave, even in Central Square, where we have a lot of access to transit, there's a lot of single-story buildings and buildings that are just empty in a way that we could revitalize Central Square and build a lot more housing. I think more realistically, due to like restrictions on city staff and how many things we can work on at once, a lot of the corridor pieces we can get started working on, but we may or may not be able to get a vote on this term. And so that might be something that we'll have to wait for next term. But I'm also optimistic. Like, I think that we are like looking at it comprehensively. There's a lot of different pieces and all of it together that I think that, in like we pass AHO this term if we do single family zoning in Alewife and Cambridge Street, and then we do corridors perhaps next term. It all kind of add up to a substantial amount of housing. And I think it'll really help tackle the problem, as well as, at the same time, like, people say that the issue is not just Cambridge, but our surrounding communities as well. And we have the MBTA Communities Act, which passed, which requires to zone for 250,000 units of housing throughout the Boston Metro, which is an incredible amount of housing. And, the organization I helped create it, Abundant Housing, was a great support in pushing that, and also will now be working with cities around enforcing that and getting them to comply. And so I think that, between Cambridge doing its part and its neighbors doing their part, I'm really hoping that we make a big dent in the housing crisis over the next couple of years.
Vice Mayor?
Oh, thank you. And the benefit of going last is everybody gets to say all the things, but I did want to add a few things. Thanks to Becca for bringing up the library. I think we have in Central Square, there has been mentioned, Councillor Toner mentioned that we could be rezoning that, but there are some publicly held spots in Central Square, parking lot 5, right? If we think about Starlight Square took on that whole, we proved we do not need a parking lot, right, in Central Square. And what could that space be? Could it be an arts and cultural space with housing on top of it? We think about Green Street Garage and the Central Square Library. I think everyone on this call can probably agree that the Central Square Library is tired, and it's the busiest library in the densest neighborhood in the city. We absolutely should be thinking about moving it somewhere where it has more prominence, right, on Mass Ave, a beautiful new library, and think about using that space that's right next to the Manning Apartments and doing the same thing, right? There are opportunities that exist with public land that I think, we could have a real conversation with city leadership about that now. I do also want to mention that we have a bunch of new housing coming online over the next 5 years, right? We've got the Cambridge Side Galleria, a bunch of housing on New Street, Wheeler Street, Foster Street, Cambridge Crossing. Somebody mentioned rezoning Alewife to, really incentivize housing. I think we do have a lot of things that are coming through the pipeline that you'll start to see come online soon, which will help alleviate it a little bit. But, it only highlights the fact that planning happened a decade ago. We need to be planning now for the decade that's coming up. So I don't have too much more to add there, but those are my thoughts. Thanks, Alan.
Sure. The other benefit of going last is that you're going first in the next round, which is the tenant protection, protecting tenants, whether through protections or other kinds of actions. So, the way I say this is every renter in Cambridge has some kind of landlord horror story to tell, whether it's a huge rent hike or failure to deal with mold or discrimination in the leasing process or harassment or getting evicted for renovations with little notice. There's a huge number of ways that this power imbalance can play out. Officially, we have rights, but in practice, it is really, really hard to see anything done about them. So I guess the question here is generally like, what is the plan? What can we do? Are things going to get better? Is the council working on anything? Is the city administration working on anything? Yeah, starting with the vice mayor, then Councillor Toner, then Councillor Azeem.
These are great questions, and I think we're all eagerly looking at the legislature to see if there's anything that they are going to be able to pass, which would allow local control for some kind of rent stabilization or some other ways to protect tenants who are, we hear about this all the time. Our emails are full of people who are like, I just got a rent increase of $500, $600, $1,000 a month. It's outrageous. And, we really have to look to our state level partners to give us those tools to do something about that here in Cambridge. I think the Councillor Azeem and I have been working on something for like the last 4 or 5 months with the city leadership, and I will let him take the lead on that because he has been such a great partner there. But there are definitely things that we need to do. I work with a lot of residents and families who say, I have a Section 8 voucher. I've seen 10 apartments. No one will call me back. When I go with them, they get a call back, right? I think that there are some real shady people out there that are illegally not taking Section 8 vouchers. Do we need a secret shopper program? Do we need a landlord database where, you get dinged if you do something like that? I think there are other things in other cities that the mayor and I are working on bringing forward something pretty soon that I'm pretty excited about. And then the last thing is, speaking of the mayor, she may or may not have mentioned this during their session, but we have been working closely with an affordable housing builder here in Cambridge who, quite honestly, some of the stories out of, Walden Square are heartbreaking. The photos are really heartbreaking. They want to build something in the city, they're going to have to go through the council first, and they're going to have to remediate those issues. I think it's incumbent upon the 9 of us to use our leverage and our privilege in this position to hold landlords accountable. In this case, we were able to hold their building, their affordable housing building, the new building that they wanted to build as an accountability piece. But what you're talking about, Alan, and what Councillor Azeem and I have been talking about is those other landlords that don't rise to the level of, oh, we see you now, we're gonna really hold your feet to the fire. So I'm gonna let him speak to that and step back at this moment, but thanks for the question.
Yeah, Councillor Toner.
Yeah, I can't claim to have worked on anything in the first 9 months on this particular issue, other than trying to help a few individuals who have reached out to me. I think we need to do a better job of educating the folks in the community about what their rights are and how they can, access the resources in the city. Cambridge has a lot of great programs, and thankfully I'm able to, just pick up the phone or email and connect them that way to help them get their supports. But I think part of the problem is giving people the empower them to be able to identify the problems they're having, because I've had, having been a teacher in Cambridge, I actually had a former student of mine reach out to me because she was having issues with her landlord, and she really didn't know what to do. And once I gave her some guidance and said, if there's any problems, let me know, we can go forward with that, she was able to straighten things out with her landlord. But I think we need people just to understand what their rights are and how they can access the supports the city already offers.
Thanks. Councillor Z.
Thank you. I think the vice mayor was being much humble. She has really been leading, and she knows so many different programs throughout the city and the neighborhoods and how they all connect together. And so she and I have been working on some really exciting things. It'll take a little bit more before we have the details fully out, but I feel that we're thinking about. I'll get into it in a second. Actually, I just wanted to first talk about you mentioned landlord abuse stories, and I just wanted to
Heads up, I
so
think
true.
just wanted to let you know, I think your internet is a little bit crackly. Is that true? Are other people also seeing that from him? Okay. You're still mostly coming through, but I wanted to give you the warning. Sorry, continue.
Thank you. I want to say, I just wanted to first start off by acknowledging the landlord issue before we get into the policy details. There is a lot of abuse, and it mainly comes from the fact that it's an unequal playing field, right? When people are desperate for housing, they will put up with a lot of poor things. So I talked initially about poor housing conditions, but there's a lot of gross stories out there. Just last week, I was talking to someone who has a landlord who's not doing anything illegal, but he has an 8-unit building, and he is a 55-year-old man who only rents to women under 23, and they live in the same building with him. But he offers cheaper rent, and so people take up that offer, and it just makes them all feel very, very uncomfortable, right? And there's so many stories of that, or apartments that aren't being taken care of, landlords who withhold your security deposit or other things, and there's just a lot of things because the power is not distributed equally, and that really means that we should take action. A few of the things that the vice mayor and I have been exploring over the last couple of months has been a secret shopper program, especially around Section 8 vouchers, and how people don't take advantage of them, but there also discrimination around a lot of other metrics, and how exactly we can hold landlords accountable for that. There's also the inspectional services part about apartments that are not up to par. Boston has a really interesting program where for larger apartment complexes, they just do automatic inspections. And so thinking about that program and exactly the details and how we might be able to incorporate some version of that in Cambridge is really important. And also, just making the housing office a lot more front-facing. We have housing resources in this city through the housing liaison, through the Human Rights Commission, And I think part of it, especially under new city managed government, is how we can structure those together so that people really know what the resources are that they have in front of City Hall. The Human Rights Commission does amazing work, but I think it can be a little bit misleading to people in terms of what resources they offer. And so really thinking about how we can collect all those resources and make it really accessible, as well as we increased in the last budget, is just increasing the staff for the housing liaison. So she has a lot more resources and people that she can address to. There's a lot of other pieces and things that we're thinking about. Like the vice mayor and I have been working on this for a long time, and we have a few more meetings throughout the next couple of months, but hopefully there'll be something ready before the end of the term.
Awesome. Thank you. I guess we'll go into open discussion now. Feel free to continue this conversation or respond to anything else that you've heard throughout the past 40 minutes. But I will take this moment to list some of the topics that audience that we submitted, got through the registration form. People asked about artist housing, the effect of the housing crisis on nonprofits, tracking corporate landlords versus small landlords versus foreign investors, and understanding that picture a little better. The stress that having to recertify your CHA voucher every year puts on you, and the uncertainty of that. Non-voucher approaches for poorest residents. Concerns about people flipping buildings and making them more expensive. Overall goals for citywide growth. The Porter Square, that the recent lab building proposed just on the Somerville line in Porter Square. The planning board and the BZA and approaches to guiding development through them. Huge grab bag. Respond to whatever you want to, or respond to anything else you've heard in the past 40 minutes. Vice Mayor has her hand up, so I guess I'll let her go first, but just generally, we have about 10 minutes to talk.
Thanks. All right. I just wanted to quickly say that you hit something that's like near and dear to my heart, which is artist housing. And I wanted to let people know that the city did just hire a director of arts and cultural planning, the first one in the city. Her name is Claudia Zaratsua, and she comes to us by way of MAPC. She did arts and culture for the Metro Area Planning Council. I'm not good with acronyms. But one of the things she really wants to look at is artist housing, and how are we going to really target some artist housing here, because we are really losing that. One of the things we did when the mayor's arts task force was really identify that there is not good artist housing, and she really thinks that the Alewife area, because of the light industrial and the way that the buildings might have those ceiling heights, might be a great place for that. So I just want to call out that she's on board with artist housing, and she will be working on that with the city. So whomever put that in, thank you for putting it in. It's an issue close to my heart.
Councillor Azeem?
I'll take the issue of the lab building in Porter Square. It's a difficult conversation to have because, Somerville is their own city, and, while someday we'll annex them, I'm joking, and, at this moment, they have their own city council. I think that, which is like, it's an interesting problem because Somerville does not have a commercial tax base in the way that we do. And so they have really high incentive to allow for a lot of lab buildings in a way that we're not at the same place right now. And because Porter Square is divided between the city, you get some suboptimal land use because we have to think about it holistically. I think it's going to be part of a longer conversation. I think right now we should think about the Cambridge side of Porter Square, which is right next to the transit stop, but a lot of the neighborhoods right there are zoned for single family homes in a way that I don't think is productive. But also, like, if we're talking about height and density, the Porter Square Mall and that area in general has a lot of space. Informally talking to Somerville city councilors and things, I think there's some momentum potentially to do something around Davis Square. And I think that they'll potentially learn from that experience what they like and don't like a part of that approach. And so I'm hoping that in the future, we'll be able to have a bigger conversation around Porter Square. But I just don't think that we're there quite yet. I think that'll be a little bit longer. So I think that this lab building that's been quite short, I think it's like 4 stories on a pretty big lot. And a lot of it is like parking restrictions and things like that come into effect. And they're even renting out parking spaces in other parts. I think that it's going to come through, but hopefully it'll be the last building of its kind. And then in like a few years, as we kind of rezone to it, we'll be able to get a little bit better land use in that area.
Just to piggyback a little on that piece, I'm not anti-lab. I don't obviously want to see biohazards in people's backyards and things like that, but I do think that the discussion we've started to have on the council is, what is it do we mean by a lab, and what are the different types of labs we have? I actually think we should be trying to do some degree of hooking the economic engine of lab development to housing, and see if there are opportunities for, if we can provide for some lab space in certain areas that comes with guaranteed number of units of housing along with it. But I think we should be looking at that and not just saying no labs in different parts of the city. On Porter Square, I know it's under new ownership. I don't know, other than that, I know nothing. But I think that's an area that over the years, I'd like to get ahead of that and think about what potential zoning for Porter Square could be, because as Councillor Azeem said, there's a huge parking lot with various buildings that I could very easily see being completely transformed into something that has a significant amount of apartments and better options for retail, and still being able to hold on to parking for out-of-town shoppers and folks to be able to go there. So I think those are the kinds of things I'd like us to focus on going forward, is like visioning a little bit about what different parts of the city could be, and developing that plan and the zoning pieces that we need to make it happen. There's a lot of great stuff in the Envision plan from over the past years. In fact, it was being referenced quite a lot tonight at the Alewife meeting, and people are using that in their thinking. I think we have to remove the obstructions to making it a reality going forward. And I'll stop there. But I'd love, Alan, if you're able to send the list of topics to us after, so that I can better educate myself on those particular issues.
Yeah, we'll do.
Yeah.
Councillor Azeem?
Yeah, I just wanted to add something real quick. One was like, just in case it was unclear, but the last building of this kind, I didn't mean a lab building. I just meant like the bad land use, just to be clear. It is like, I recommend everyone look it up after this if they're not seen it. It's like a little bit of like not ideally what would be looking for right on top of a red line station and a commuter rail station as well, right? So it's like a really great transit area. So that's what I just wanted to add on that point.
I didn't mean to insinuate you were anti-lab either, Councillor Azeem. So
I do think that housing is a bigger priority, but yeah, I think that we're on the same page in how we think about commercial development. I also just wanted to add that like housing is also like like in Porter Square in particular, I think we're going through the process right now of eliminating parking minimums, and I think that it's very important. I'll just say it flat, like it's not like removing any parking. You're allowed to have it if you want it. What we've seen in Central Square, because a lot of that area was developed denser in the past, is that about 2/3 of people who live in Central Square choose to not have a car. And so there's a lot of excess parking capacity, like a lot less parking because people choose to have it less in Central Square. I think that Porter Square, right on top of the red line and commuter rail, we might see a little bit more people opting out of car use if they want to. And I think removing parking minimums will really allow that area to develop a little bit more organically based on what people need. And so I think that'll be pretty big for that area.
Vice Mayor, anything to add on this or anything else?
I think I'm good.
Okay. All right. Anyone else have anything else they want to add on this or anything else?
I wanted to say, we think about mass transit, we think about, the red line, and we're also going through a bus network redesign where we'll have like hopefully a 35% increase in frequency overall. We also legalized e-bikes level, so hopefully those will make it a little bit easier to get around as well. And so we'll all see how it goes.
Yeah.
The one thing I wanted to say was, I'm really been thinking about messaging and marketing, and I posted something on Twitter tonight about Mayor Driscoll in Salem, the way that she approaches this, the changing the neighborhood characters. She said, the character of our communities is at stake, and I really like that sort of flip of like thinking of it that way. And I wonder about ABC and the partnership that we have, how do we change the conversation so that it isn't so broken around housing? And I think, like, when you think about that simple shift from the character of the neighborhood to the character of our communities is at stake, is it makes it such a different conversation. So, you know, when we think about like, what is ABC's advocacy going to look like over the next, you know, 14 months, 15 months of this council term, how can you guys help us think about changing the conversation? I think one of the things we saw during the city manager search is that, you know, we had targeted focus groups, we had really different ways of engaging with people. And so like, how can we do a better job engaging with the residents of Cambridge on this issue and making sure that everybody understands that like, this is what we're trying to do. This is what's at stake. The character of our community is at stake. So I kind of wanted to add that because I know that you guys are going to come from this meeting and say, okay, now like what's next? That's part of what's next is how do we kind of change the conversation?
That's well taken. Because I know we and certainly I kind of I'm our logistics captain in ABC. I'm always like, what is happening at the next council meeting? What is the next policy that's going to get passed? Like, you know, like how do we make sure that this person talks to this person so that these things advance? But I do hear your point about we need to have a broader conversation about this stuff. Councillor Azeem, what were you going to say?
Yeah, I just wanted to build off. Like, I love that the vice mayor brought that up. I think that, we're doing a parking study at the city, and like a big part of that is like saying like, what does parking mean to people? Like, what does it enable more than like, what is the raw numbers that we need? And I think about housing in that same way, in that like a lot of the conversation that we have sometimes is around the fact that like we have like, a certain sort of architectural style that we think is very like critical to the neighborhood and things like that. And I actually like love Cambridge's architecture, and I want to legalize more of the buildings that we already see in the city. But I think an important piece of it is also that like a big part of this for me is that like everyone I know, like no one really owns a home in Cambridge. And that means that like as they get older and they want to have kids, or they just like realize that they want a little bit more than the 70 square feet that I live in, is that like they move to Somerville, or people living in Somerville move to JP, and people moving JP move to Framingham, and they just get further and further away. And that really sucks. Like I think a big part of like allowing for more housing and making the city more affordable is like the people who make up my community won't leave, right? And I think that's just so important. And I think that's true for everyone, right? Regardless of what it is. It's just that, if Cambridge becomes more expensive, all of us know people that will leave because of that. And that is an important part of the community that we lose. And I think that that's really what people think of first when they think of community, is the people in their city. So, yeah.
All right, then I guess we'll go to our last go round, because this is a great segue into kind of the last question, which is takeaways. Like what, if there's something that you want an audience member to take away from this conversation, or, if there's in particular, if someone's newly interested in being an advocate or getting involved, do you have any recommendations for things they should do, or wisdom they should keep in mind? What are your concluding thoughts in this conversation? We'll start with Councillor Toner.
I think what piggybacking on what Vice Mayor Mallon said is, I think what will be great for ABC in general, or individuals folks, is to really start the conversation, not just on like what policy order are we going to fight for tonight at the next council meeting, but what I'm discovering, and Vice Mayor Mallon could tell me offline where I'm wrong, but I'm discovering on the city council, it's very difficult for us to actually have open conversation about particular issues, because we're always, in danger of violating open meeting law. We can't talk to more than, 4 people at a time. And I think it would be actually really helpful if ABC and some other folks in the city were to, convene something where we try to have this holistic conversation about, okay, we have these tools, some of them are working, some of them aren't working the way we thought they would work, like, inclusionary zoning. How do we come back and look at some of these things in a more holistic way to get, if our goal is to increase the number of units of housing in the city, what levers need to be rethought, and how can we create the environment to move forward those things? Because I think just focusing on like this policy order or that ordinance or whatever, I think we're losing the whole picture, and it might be might not be getting us where we want to go.
After your retreat with the city manager, we could have our own
Yeah.
retreat.
Yeah.
Whichever one of you wants to go next.
I'll go next to leave the vice mayor to have the last word. I'll just say, I think that we're going to move on policy this term. I'm pretty optimistic that we'll be able to get some big things done. And obviously people's support and like helping with messaging and stories and trying to convince their neighbors is going to play a really important role in that. I'll also say it's just like hard to be pro housing in a city in that like a lot of the people you're trying to help either aren't here yet because they haven't moved here yet or they're moving out. And so it's really, really hard politically. And so I think thinking about how to get your neighbors or your friends or like people who don't either care or pay attention to municipal politics is a really, really important piece of the puzzle. And I think that, in some ways, the most effective advocacy you can do is on, the first Tuesday in November. And so I think that's just an important piece to keep in mind as well. Yeah.
So I guess I'll go last as the senior member on this call. Advocacy works, right? ABC's advocacy works. It's working. Continue doing it. That's my biggest takeaway is that you have a pro-housing city council because you made a pro-housing city council. As Councillor Azeem said, on that first Tuesday in November, you guys went to the polls and you got us here, and we are working well together. You may not always see what we're working on. I think, Councillor Azeem and I are working on some things. Councillor Toner and Councillor Azeem are working on some things. Like we're all working to put forward some policies. Some of them take longer than others, but what you see on Monday nights or you see at ordinance hearings, that's not the only things that we're working on. So, if you're ever curious about like, hey, is anybody on the council working on this or have you thought of that, just reach out and we can tell you, yeah, one of us is working on this and here's the person. And if you want to get involved, please do. It's always really helpful. I mean, I like to read stuff, but like, I can't read everything. I like to look into things, but it's very helpful to get suggestions and information from the community and from housing advocates and like people who are in this work and in community with us together. So advocacy works, keep doing it. Thanks for doing it. And thanks for being here tonight at 9:00 on a Wednesday night.
Yeah, that thanks goes back to the three of y'all. Thank you so much to the three of y'all and to everyone who is with us tonight. It is late. I apologize for that. So I will conclude with the same thing and concluded with last time, just trying to pull up the slide real quick, which is, reminder to join our mailing list. If you want to stay informed, go to our website. We share newsletters, we share council updates, we share event announcements. Send the city council questions if you have them. Go to the website, look up individual councilors if you're curious about things they said. Email us if you have questions. And if you want to be a part of the advocacy, which does work, please consider joining ABC as a member. We watch meetings together, we discuss policy together, we strategize together, we table together, we canvas together. It's a great community to be a part of. And with that, thank you everybody and have a good night.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.